Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome. I'd like to welcome you to the City of Casey Council meeting being held on Tuesday, the 1st of December 2020. In line with the restrictions issued by the Victorian Government on public gatherings due to COVID-19, the public gallery for this meeting is closed and the meeting is being held virtually and publicly live streamed in keeping with the good practice guidelines issued by the Minister for Local Government. I'd like to open the meeting with the statement of acknowledgement. The City of Casey proudly acknowledges the traditional owners, Casey's Aboriginal communities and their rich culture, and pays respect to their elders past, present and future. We acknowledge Aboriginal people as Australia's first peoples and as the traditional owners and custodians of the land on which we work and live. The diversity statement. The City of Casey is home to a remarkable diversity of cultures, languages, faiths, identities, landscapes and stories. From our first Australians to our most recent arrivals and every wave between, the City of Casey welcomes and represents all community members and their respective ambitions to live healthy, rewarding and happy lives. We recognise this diversity as our strength and we aim to share, nurture and celebrate it. I'd like to start today by welcoming my colleague administrators. Firstly, Mr. Miguel Belmar.
Good afternoon.
And Mr. Cameron Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon.
And our Chief Executive Officer, Glenn Patterson, and our support officers today being Jacinta and Jordan. Thank you for your assistance. I'd like to move to item 2, the confirmation of minutes. Is there a mover and a seconder to confirm the minutes of the council meeting held on the 17th of November 2020?
Yes, I'll move those.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Seconder?
Seconded, Chair.
All in favour? Carried. Declaration of interests. I've considered my obligations under Section 130 of the Local Government Act 2020 and do not have a conflict of interest relevant to the agenda papers. I also note that no officers have declared conflicts in reports numbers 5.1 to 5.4 in today's agenda. Do my fellow administrators have conflicts of interest they wish to declare? No?
I have nothing to declare, Chair.
Thank you. I note no interest. Thank you very much. Item 4, public question time. There are no public questions received for this afternoon's council meeting. So I'll move to officer reports, item 5. And item 5.1 is planning for green wedges and agricultural land, Casey's submission to the DELP state government. Do I have a mover for the recommendation?
I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Seconder?
I'll second that.
Mr. Belmar, I invite you to speak to your motion, Mr. Boardman.
Thank you very much, Chair. It is a pleasure to move the officer's report in relation to the submission that we propose to submit to the State Government's Green Wedge and Agricultural Land consultation paper. It is also very timely, Chair, considering that in recent council meetings we've had to decide upon a number of strategic and sensitive planning applications that have occurred, or will occur, I should say, in the green wedge components applicable to Casey's municipal boundaries. And what we have discovered as administrators, and certainly this does not necessarily render Casey unique in this regard, is that there is a desire, not just for consistency and clarity amongst the community insofar as permissible developments and also the treatment of these applications under a consistent framework, but also to make our lives a little bit more easier in communicating back to both proponents and opponents of such proposals. So this is a process that's been going on for some months. There is a consultation paper, as I've alluded to, planning for Melbourne's green wedges and agricultural lands, in which we have now compiled a submission to deal with a number of the matters raised in the discussion paper, which I will touch on a few of them shortly, but also to seek, as I said, that clarity and that consistency. What we are specifically highlighting as part of our submission is that there is support from the Council for further protection of Melbourne's green wedge and agricultural lands. We are, as I've said, seeking clear guidance and increased state level support in the preparation of green wedge management plans, which is quite important when we come to decide upon future applications for developments and other amendments applicable to the green wedges, both at the top end, the foothills areas in the north of the municipality and in the south around the Western Port area. And it is equally critical that when we are dealing with green wedge management plan, they provide detailed background information about the region and they inform which zones and overlays are applied commensurately. We do support the increased functionality and adaptability of the green wedge zone and green wedge A zone as the most effective and appropriate tool to dictate planning outcomes for use in the development of the land. We're seeking to ensure that the land use which are incompatible with agricultural requirements are generally discouraged and are only allowed in certain locations of the green wedge area. And finally, there's a support for the inclusion of localisation, citing development design requirements within the zones and overlays to reduce the impact on non-agricultural uses, including dwellings on adjoining sites, particularly those sites used for agricultural purposes. There are just a few points I just want to make to highlight some of the aspects within the submission that we are not supportive insofar as what issues that were raised in the discussion paper. And one relates to amending the Planning and Environment Act 1987 to include a vision, objectives and regional policy for green wedges that required the preparation, review and ministerial approval of green wedge management plans. Whilst we do in principle have an agreement that there needs to be a process of ministerial approval at the right stage, we are foreshadowing in our submission that it should not duplicate existing planning schemes and amendment processes. We're only making this submission and our recommendation based upon that this is a unique and strategic process, not one that duplicates an existing statutory process and one that takes into consideration the factors that I've articulated, that the uniqueness of the green wedge management plans are foremost in the ministerial process. Another aspect of the discussion paper which we are not in total agreements is a requirement for planning schemes in rural zones within 100 kilometres of Melbourne to be approved by parliamentary ratification. Having served in the state parliament and having been party to a number of these applications, whilst the parliament as a review body does have a role to play in such processes, it is not the optimal scenario, and we must have a much more streamlined process under existing statutory provisions to deal with such applications, rather than having default process which is inferred in parts of the discussion paper to seek parliamentary ratification. So we have articulated on page 16 of our submission why we think that is the case and why there are other processes which are more applicable in the circumstances. And finally, Chair, if I could also articulate on page 23 of our submission in relation to some of the conditional elements and the limitations on land use, and this has been particularly pertinent considering some of the applications that we have dealt with recently. There does need to be limits on discretionary uses. There does need to be guidelines on some of the non-specified uses, but we don't want to have a situation where there's overarching restrictions on some of those discretionary uses. So if I take, for example, the recently considered proposal of Rosemale Gallery, which is now subject to an independent planning process, Council should quite rightly have flexibility in deciding upon its recommendations to such a proposal based within its own guidelines, in addition to what are the state government guidelines. So it can't be a one-size-fits-all. There needs to be flexibility and consideration of each party's roles and responsibilities in deciding upon such applications, and that is for the reasons we have highlighted that some of those flexibility and limitation provisions are important, but should not be set in concrete as the discussion paper infers, albeit very genteelly. So with those comments, Chair, I'm very pleased to support the submission and wish those involved in the development of the new management plan well, and look forward to receiving feedback from our council officers on future developments and how it will apply to our future decision making.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar, would you like to speak to the motion?
Yes, I'll just make some brief comments. Reading the report and reading the submission, I focus on two issues. Firstly, the comments in the submission with respect to protecting Melbourne's food bowl. I think that the last 12 months have certainly demonstrated to us the needs we have to ensure that we have security of essential services, and a submission such as this continues the strong work that Casey has done for many years to ensure that agricultural land within the council is properly protected and continues to be protected into the future, because once it's gone, you don't get it back. Secondly, I'd also like to commend the comments that Mr. Boardman has made with respect to the work that has gone into this submission regarding discretionary uses. Discretionary uses are appropriate in the Greenwich zone, and it's interesting to note that this submission continues the important work that Council does in acknowledging that there can be discretionary uses in the Greenwich zone, and they are the sorts of uses that we've dealt with in recent times, uses such as education. And so it's vital that Council continue to be involved in the discussion with government about those discretionary uses, those appropriate uses in the Greenwich zone. And so with those comments, I commend the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. I just wanted to add one brief comment with respect to the community engagement on this matter. And this is a process being run by DELP, by the state government, and I understand from the report that there is going to be a public exhibition period over several weeks that will involve the opportunity for the community to comment. And at the time of writing this report, the public consultation process has not been confirmed. If there are members of our community that are interested in this matter, I would suggest that they have a look at the DELP website, and that will certainly provide an update, but it's not a consultation process that the council are undertaking. With that, I put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.2 is employment land studies and resolution of C219 and alternative Casey Field South land use plan. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Belmar.
I'll move that.
Thank you. Seconder, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar, would you like to speak to that matter?
Yes, I'll just make some brief comments in moving this motion. I'm mindful of the wording of the motion that appears that's just been put up on the screen. It's vital that the community understands that by adopting this motion this evening, Council is in fact changing its resolutions that it has made on two previous occasions in the past, in December 2014 and again in May 2018, regarding the approach that it is taking to the use of land in the Casey Fields precinct structure plan and also in Cranbourne West. Now, it is doing that for a very good reason, and it is doing that because of important strategic work that's been done over a long period of time, but has been most recently demonstrated in the two reports referred to in the motion, the report being the Melbourne Industrial and Commercial Land Use Plan of April 2020, and the more recent report of the Southeastern Economic Corridor Strategic Context Report. Now, I don't want to delve too far into those reports other than to note a number of matters. The first is the importance of employment land to the City of Casey. We are a growing community, but we are a growing community that needs to properly provide for a number of different land uses. And careful planning, careful strategic planning takes into account that over time a community will need land both for residential uses, recreational uses and employment uses. I'm mindful that the documents we are referring to tonight and the reasons why these amendments are being made to previous positions council has had include very long-term planning objectives. And you can have short-term planning, you can have long-term planning, and you cannot have much more long-term planning in the time I've been working with council than a report that plans out to 2060. So this is a vision that is being adopted that says that over a very significant period of time, the City of Casey wants to see land put towards employment uses, not just for the next 10 years, not just for the next 20 years, but well into the future. That is the vision that we are seeking to enshrine through adopting these policies. And I am mindful in moving this motion that is an appropriate vision given the growth that is occurring in our community, and proper and careful planning which takes into account having employment opportunities that are close to residential properties, and also having employment planning that looks at different stages of employment opportunities. And I know, for example, that the policy refers to there being 3 different horizons over which employment use of land can occur. And so for those reasons, I commend the motion. I commend the view that Casey is enshrining tonight, which is that we are committed to there being land that is appropriately set aside for employment within our municipality. It's a key driver of our economy, and it sits well with the objective of having a number of well-planned land uses in Casey. And so for those reasons, I commend the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman.
Thank you, Chair. Briefly echoing and in full support of Mr. Belmar's comments, a longer-term view, particularly as the reinforcement provided by the VPA's Southeast Economic Corridor Strategic Context Report to 2060 is very much welcome from a council and from a planning perspective, but also should be welcome from a community perspective. Similar to the first report we just debated, Chair, looking at long-term growth and economic aspects of our planning scheme, but providing sufficient flexibility to adapt to what are obviously going to be continuing demographic changes and also longer-term community expectations is what this municipality and certainly what our decision-making needs to encapsulate. The 2 remaining unplanned PSPs, Croxcal and the Caseyfield South Employment Zone, there is quite a significant amount of information within the reports around some of the specific employment or proposed employment uses that those 2 areas could encapsulate as part of this recommendation and the overall strategic framework. But what I think is most important to us, as Mr. Belmar has articulated, is that this is not something that's been looked in isolation as it appears to one particular geographic location. It does have implications to neighbouring municipalities insofar as transport requirements, other amenity aspects, accessibility, so forth, and it needs to be seen through that lens. We are one of, if not the fastest growing municipality in the state. There is going to be significant and increasing and continual population and service expectation pressures in our planning processes and in our general council service and demand processes, and to ensure that we're balancing that with the adequate level of economic growth, employment growth, and providing ongoing assistance to what is now seen as a general evolving decentralisation policy across the state, if not the country. It's important that these type of PSPs and consistency with some of these aspects are articulated. So I commend the report. I thank the officers involved for their input, and for Mr. Belmar for his comments. So thank you.
Thank you. I'll put the motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. We now have item 5.3, which is document revocation request, and I'll leave it to my colleagues to explain what that recommendation is about. Do I have a mover?
I will move that.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. And a seconder?
Yes, I second that.
Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman, please explain the recommendation.
Well, if I could put it very simply, Chair, it's out with the old and in with the new. So I could potentially leave it at that, but I will go into a little bit more detail. There are 6 frameworks, procedures, programs, strategies, policies that we are revoking tonight, fundamentally because they have been replaced, not just because of ongoing and continual improvements to our governance and processes, but because they are obsolete by virtue of what they've been replaced with. In short, and at a very high level, the reason why we are revoking the asset valuation framework and the asset valuation procedure is that we have adopted asset valuation policy, and as part of the asset valuation policy there is an asset valuation manual which supersedes both the former framework and procedure. In regards to the landscape policy, we've created guidelines that are now relevant and up to date. The policy was out of date and the guidelines are going to be managed at a departmental level. And this also applies to the pass and trail strategy and the smart city strategy, is that they have been superseded with other relevant policies as articulated in the report. I will make some very brief comments around the Australia Day Awards program, because this is probably something which the community may have some curiosity with. We are certainly not abandoning the process. What we are doing is that we are acting upon feedback that we have received from the community, primarily through the Casey Conversations mechanism, that a better way and much more in line with community expectations to manage the awards program in the future is for it to be an internal process, managed and maintained and approved by the Active Communities Department within the Community Life Division, based upon community consultation and ensuring that there is a more robust and more formal process applied to those ultimate award winners. It does provide greater flexibility for the officers and the external assessment panel to innovate, to come up with what would be seen as more responsive awards and programs to meet community expectations. But it is certainly not a replacement or a discontinuation. It is a supplementation and an improvement. But overall, this resolution is a very procedural resolution in nature. It is part of the ongoing continuous improvement that we are embarking on our governments and policies and processes, and one of which I think in the future, Chair, we will continue to see more of, and to be continually transparent in all aspects of our ongoing administration.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar.
Mr. Boardman's done a very thorough explanation of the policies. I'd only add that I commend the work that's been done by council officers in the continuous review and improvement of policies, and continually ensuring that council is fully complying with legislation and up-to-date changes in legislation. And as Mr. Boardman has reflected, this is an ongoing improvement, and it's reflected in these somewhat procedural policies. But what they do is they show that council is carefully ensuring it is up to date and applying the appropriate policies at any point in time. And I commend the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. I'll put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Item 5.4 is contract CT 000628, the provision of plant and equipment hire. Do I have a mover for the recommendation? Thank you, Mr. Belmar.
I'll move that.
And a seconder? Mr. Boardman. Mr. Belmar, I invite you to speak to the recommendation.
Thank you. I move this motion aware that this is a contract that has been put out to tender that that is specifically about the council using plant hire services in its civil construction and city presentation team. This is a contract that will be for an initial 5-year period with an option to extend for a further 2-year period in a single increment. There was a tender process that involved an advertisement in The Age on the 3rd of September 2020 and a closing date of, 3rd of September 2020 and a closing date of the 30th of September. So it was open for a month. Pleasingly, that resulted in 54 downloads and 15 tenders. I am satisfied on reviewing the documents that an appropriate process has been undertaken that is fully and properly transparent and properly considers all the procurement policies that are appropriate to this tender. And for those reasons, I'm moving the motion, and I congratulate those successful tenderers, and I encourage those that have been unsuccessful on this occasion to continue to look for other opportunities to do business with Casey. And for those reasons, I move the motion.
Thank you, Mr. Belmar. Mr. Boardman, would you like to speak to the motion?
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly, echoing Mr. Belmar's sentiments that I too am very satisfied with the process and the result. I thank the parties that submitted full tenders, all 15 of them. I acknowledge that a number of them have been unsuccessful. Due to the capital works program and the ongoing volume of projects that are coming online in the near future, we do, as Mr. Belmar has suggested, encourage those unsuccessful to continue to bid to ensure that we remain competitive and we are meeting community expectations with our capital works and other programs. And to those who are successful, thank you for your contribution, and we wish you well with successful delivery of the project.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman. I'll put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried. Now move to item 5.5, contract acceptance and sealing CT 000641 open space maintenance north, central, south and road reserves. And before we move to a recommendation on this report, I'd like to introduce it and make some comments about a process we've gone through. At the City of Casey, we have very robust policies and procedures in place. And as you can see, we're in a constant process of reviewing those. But they are supported by strong governance frameworks. And that enables us as a panel of administrators to ensure that we're acting with fairness and integrity when undertaking the procurement of goods and services. It's by following these processes and our commitment to them that we're able to recognise when in an instance of failure to declare a conflict of interest occurs. This has unfortunately been the case during the tender process for this current agenda item, the open space maintenance. It has come to the panel's attention that a council officer involved in the assessment of this tender had an undisclosed conflict of interest. I and my fellow administrators take this matter very, very seriously. The identification, disclosure and management of perceived and actual conflicts of interest is a standard which no organisation can compromise upon, and Casey is absolutely no exception. In the full interest of transparency and in following our own procurement policies and procedures, the panel of administrators has unanimously agreed to not approve the recommendation of council officers on item 5.5 of today's agenda, and subsequently have directed that the tender process be recommenced with independent oversight. As such, we'll be putting the contract back out for retender, and officers will bring a new report before council early in the new year. Additionally, a review is being undertaken to understand the full circumstances of the tender process that did occur and identify areas for potential improvement going forward. We won't make any further comment on this matter at this stage, except to reinforce that every individual within this organisation has a duty to disclose and manage any conflict of interest consistent with their statutory obligations and council policy. This applies equally to all of us as a panel of administrators, to the executive and to each and every council officer. On this one occasion, it appears as this has not been the case, and consequently, we will be making this decision. As administrators, we have set a very high standard for the organisation, and we'll continue to take a zero tolerance approach to matters such as this. There is a new recommendation on the screen. If I can ask, thank you to our officer. That is a new recommendation, and I would seek the panel to move that recommendation. Do I have a mover?
I will move that, Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Boardman, and a seconder.
I'll second that.
Mr. Belmar, and I'll put that motion to the vote. All in favour? Carried unanimously. Thank you. Now move on to item 6, consideration of reports of committees. And I note in the agenda there's a record of discussion, and we just note that record. Item 7, petitions. There are no petitions received for the council meeting this afternoon. Urgent business. There are no urgent business items for this council meeting. And item 9, there are no closed matters for consideration at this council meeting. So that leaves me one last item, and that's item 10, to close the council meeting of the 1st of December, and thank you all for your observation and participation this afternoon. I wish you a good afternoon. Thank you.